Welcome everyone to a very special edition of the Canadian Talkin Shop podcast. Today is 9/11 and it's the 20th anniversary of the horrific attacks that took place in New York City and in other regions of the northeastern part of the United States. And today I'm joined by my co-host, as I am each and every single week, and that's Mr. Mike Bierkoff. How you doing today?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad.
So it's a very somber day for a lot of people, especially for people like you and I that were definitely very much alive during 9/11 and were in our teenager years. And it was the most horrific event in like in terms of a terrorist attack in modern history. But the impact of it we're still feeling today. So I just felt it was right to come together and have an hour long chat or however long this is of just what took place that day and how it had affected us. And I want to start with where we were that day. Everybody knows where they were when they heard the news that Elvis died. Everyone knows where they were when they heard that Kurt Cobain died. Everybody knows where they were on 9/11. So let's start with you, Mike. What happened in your life that day when you first heard the news about 9/11?
So it was in my younger stage of my life. So I remember I was living beside one of my brothers, and it was like a fourplex deal. I was partying and whatnot. I think I was actually working at Save On at the time. Save On's like a grocery store here, kind of like an Overweight. But it was like I had a rough night the night before, and it was just kind of that was my gig. It's like when I'm asleep, you don't fucking wake me up unless it's important, right? One of my friends who I was roommates with, would go over to my brother's and like have coffee in the morning. They'd be over there like 7 a.m. or whatnot, and they'd be having coffee. And so they were actually watching TV when it had happened, right? So what they told me was one plane hit a tower, and they were like, fuck it, we're not waking Mike up. And then a second plane hit the tower, and that's when I got woke up. My buddy comes over and he's like, holy fuck, you wouldn't believe what's going on. There's all this shit going on in like New York. You gotta come see. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like, okay, well, it's gotta be something worthwhile because you guys fucking woke me up. And I remember just throwing something on, going over and watching the TV, and then the towers thing, the planes had gone into the towers, and it was just like, holy shit. It's like the world doesn't stop for anything, but it stopped then. Like right then and there, everyone's just like, okay, we're watching the news and we're trying to figure out what the fuck happened. And it was like a movie. I remember everyone saying this is like shit you see in movies. Like, this doesn't seem real. Like, almost to the point where you're hoping it's not, because it's just so chaotic and everything. And anyone in our experience, that chaos was told in the history books, with Pearl Harbor and Japan with the bomb. So I mean, we weren't in New York, but it was like the first time in our lives that event that large had happened. So it was like, this is like a movie. Like, what the fuck's going on? Like, is this real? And and everything that followed through with the people coming out of the buildings. And it's just, I remember it was just like everyone was frozen, numb, just watching it as it unfolded.
It was very much a feeling of that. It was definitely numbness. It was that shock of what the fuck is going on right now. So I'll start by going backwards into my story where I was that day. I was a terrible high school student. Terrible high school student. Once you started giving me the options of skipping school, I was all for it. And it just so happened that morning that because my high school was very, very close to our mall in town, very, very close. And with that being said, it was very easy for us to skip class and go to the mall and hang out, hang out in the food court. When I first started smoking cigarettes, when I was around 11, we were able to even smoke in the food court at that point. But I was around 16 at this point. So we're sitting around in the mall doing what we do every morning. We skip class and we're just sitting around the table. And there was a store called Fursanti's at the time. It's a sports store. It's now known as Sports Check in Canada. And their store had these big giant TVs behind all their merchandise in their store. I walked to go to the bathroom, and I started walking past when I was coming back, and I saw all the TVs were turned to CNN. And that was, if it wasn't on TSN or Sportsnet, it wasn't on any channel when it came to Fursanis. So you're looking at CNN here in a sports store, and you're going, what the fuck? And then you look at the footage, and at this point, it was around. So the first plane hit the first tower at 8:46 in the morning. It was flown into the North Tower. We probably started getting hip to what was going around 9:30, because 17 minutes later at 9:03, another one hit the South Tower. So yeah, it's around 9:30, and now you're seeing these planes over and over and over again flying into buildings, and I'm just standing there like, what the fuck? And you can't hear nothing. There's no sound. It was just watching over and over again. And I remember sprinting over to the table. I'm like, guys, I think the US is under attack right now, because two planes just flew into the World Trade Centers. And I think they're saying something about something going on in Washington. And lo and behold, they had 9:37 in the morning, a plane flew into the Pentagon. So that's now happening, and we're watching all this real time then. And at 10:03 in the morning, all the passengers that were on that flight were getting hip to what was going on. They were having phone calls with their family, and they were getting hip to what was going on. And they all piled together, and they stopped what could have been either an attack on the US Capitol or the White House. So my buddies and I are sitting in this sports store, and it's like everybody's just watching, and time has just stood still. Nobody cares that we're high school students loitering in a sports store. Nobody cares about anything in that moment except for watching the horror that's taking place and wondering what's next. And that was part of the horror. I mean, what did you think was going to happen next?
The same thing when you mentioned it, that something was going to happen to the White House, or that it was, like, and no one really knew exactly right away. So I was thinking, well, something happened with the flight plan, and then you got someone else go, well, it's two planes, right? And then there's the Pentagon, right? So then it's like, okay, well, these got to be targeted attacks. This can't be just some fault in the fucking system, right? So, but that's interesting. You're like in the streets, so to say. So like you were also around other people that weren't in your like family. Like I was kind of around family members inside like a house, right? So it's like, go get a coffee. We're sitting here and we're all just like watching this, obsessing over it. Like you got other people around you've probably never met before, and you're feeling their emotion and their stuff too. So that must have been a unique side of the experience. Like you're on your way to school, like you said, or whatnot. That's like in a movie itself. How many times have we seen it in a movie where someone's just walking by the fucking TV store and then they see the event in the movie, you know what I mean? Or the thing that changes the path in the movie. They caught that clip. Like that's what happened with you too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like in the scene in Forrest Gump as an example, when Forrest is walking by the TVs and he's seeing Elvis do the dance, and it literally froze him still. It's kind of similar in that regard. Yeah, never really thought of it like that, but yes, very movie-esque. And just like you said, the surrounding of like, because more and more people are gathering around, and the only thing that's being said is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you explain what happened, and then the sheer paleness that comes over the face, and just the words like very little being said, but words like dear God or what's next, and then I remember us all coming together and running back to school, because it's like, do they know? Because you got to remember, I'm 34, so when I was 16, or in 2001 as an example, it wasn't like there was technology the way that there's technology today. Yes, we had cell phones and whatnot, but they weren't really smartphones. I mean, I remember selling some of the first Apple iPhones with Rogers when I was like 21, 22, and even selling some of the first data phones period in BlackBerry and so on and so forth. So when we were 16, we just had Nokia cell phones and regular cell phones, and it didn't really give you the information in real time like they do today. So we ran back to see if anyone else knew, and a lot of people in school didn't know, and a lot of them were finding out through us or finding out through other people that were doing kind of the similar thing. So we're in math class now at this point, and we're telling everybody now they're wheeling in the TV and they're trying to get the TV going, and they just couldn't get it going because the TVs that they had, they didn't carry cable. We were trying to get free to air. It just wasn't working. And we were just all told to go home. So a bunch of my buddies and I, as we normally did, we would go back to my place during the day because my dad would work till like 6 o'clock. So we always used my place as an after school hangout because I knew we could hang out for a few hours before dad comes home and we can smoke our weed and smoke our cigarettes. And he knew what was going on. And he preferred that it took place in the confines of his home where everyone would be safe versus on the street before any of you people start judging my dad. However, and I just remember being huddled around CNN, and then that was my life for the next, I don't know how many weeks, was just huddled around CNN. I remember when President Bush addressed the nation at that point. I remember when President Bush declared war. I remember all of that, which is crazy to me because, as you and I discussed even earlier today, our memories are shit. I know me specifically, attention deficit hyper disorder and my mental health issues really bogged that down, and my THC use. But I can remember that like it just happened yesterday.
See how my lifestyle was back then. Literally, like one plane flew into the tower. This is a big ass fucking event, and they're like, "We're not waking them up. It's not important enough." And then the second plane comes in, and it's like, "You need to fucking wake them up." It's crazy just how it happened, and in the time it happened in my life, because I was just this, so to say, party animals, and I was the same thing. It was just like, I'm gonna be watching this because I want to know what the hell's gonna happen. Is this gonna escalate into something bigger? You know, everyone starts thinking nuclear bombs and stuff like that. And that's where I look in your region. If someone attacked the White House with a nuclear bomb, you got a lot more shit to deal with than someone on my end in BC. So we all have this kind of fucking talking about that shit, and someone goes and smokes a joint or has a few beers and they're talking. That's the conversation. Is 9/11 what happened? I remember when we've seen the first one jump out of the building, and you're going, is that debris? Well, what is that? And then you're like, holy shit, those are people. First thing, I'm like, well, why are they jumping? That's why they're jumping, because the building's on fucking fire. Like, it's either burn or jump, and it's just like trying to process all of that, because everyone around me was like, I call it desensitized, and a lot of people were anyways. Like Grand Theft Auto, I think, had just started to come out, and I was really into the violent video games, right? So in all of our fucking minds is just like, this shit's a game. And then when 9/11 happens, it's like, oh whoa, there's like some reality here in our lives, right? Because nothing like that ever fucking happened before that time.
No, we went several decades. Like you said, you mentioned Pearl Harbor, and I believe the Japanese version was Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
There was all these different events that took place, but then there was several years, decades even, where nothing of that magnitude really took place. I mean, there was things like Vietnam, and there was wars, and there was violence, and sure, but to have a catastrophic bombing or terrorist act or whatever you want to call it take place at that specific time, especially, it was so frightening. And like you alluded to, being that I'm from Ontario and close to Toronto, not only am I close to New York State and everything, I'm also close to Washington, and Toronto has its fair share of targets. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I was sitting back with bated breath, looking up at the sky all the time, wondering if I'm going to see a plane fly so low that it's going to go into something. And that was the fear that a lot of people carried for a long time. I mean, I can even think of the first time I got on a plane after everything that happened at 9/11, and it made you feel awkward. It made you feel uncomfortable. It made you wonder. And for an event of that magnitude, for the Americans to allow an event of that magnitude to take place is fucking mind-boggling to me. And we're going to get into that in a bit, but yeah, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear even on the Canadian side. I remember when Bush declared war, I thought, oh fuck, he's declaring war on these people now. It's only a matter of time before they strike us back. Is this World War III? Is this what World War III becomes? Because who else gets involved in this? Because they involved the Iraqis by invading them. They used that as an opportunity to invade them too. And I thought there was going to be a lot of countries like maybe China and Russia that's like, we understand you're invading Afghanistan, but why are you invading Iraq again exactly? And there wasn't much resistance to it. But I'm going into a whole tangent now, but yeah, there was a lot of fear at that time. And even though you were out in BC, I imagine there was still a lot of fear that way too, because you're still very close to the American border.
Yeah, no, there definitely was, and that's the other thing with being Canadian. Any listeners from other countries and stuff, we rely on the Americans for our military as our military allies. Like America's got all the numbers when it comes to like if we were to get attacked, they're the ones that are neighbors. They're going to help us get through this and all this other shit. Like, we've got other allies too, but we rely on America heavily for them to be our military allies. So when they were getting quote unquote attacked or going to war, you know, well, we're their allies, so I guess we're going to be fucking joining them and going to war too, even though our numbers are significantly less than theirs when it comes to military capabilities.
Oh God, not even in the same ballpark.
No, it's kind of embarrassing. So that kind of I kind of went on another line, but that's one of the things where when kind of there's some American bashing happen and stuff, it's like they're like the big kid at school protecting us. They're like the big guy in jail that's like, hey man, I'll be your friend, you know, without assaulting you. You know, give me your chocolate. But like they're our allies, and then that's also too because they're our allies and they got attacked, like that affects us too. You know, it's like the guy on our team, he just got taken out, or he got getting hit in the shins, you know. So we all got to stand up, and that brings the whole like, are we in a World War III scenario, right? And the people that had everyone that had the fear for how long they had, and coming back around from all that fear was very inspiring, and it was amazing. Because like Kim that we interviewed, he was mentioning how he went down there and there was just metal detectors everywhere right after it happened, and security guards everywhere. And then when he returned later on, I think it was a year or two later on, he had mentioned that these things were gone and people were they were able to move forward and be live without fear, you know.
Yeah, and it's very true. I can now share my story. I wanted to share it when we were talking with Kim, but I actually went to the States. So obviously it happened in September. So the following June, I went to the States on a road trip. And how that road trip was arranged was actually really cool. I had no idea I was going anywhere. And then we got to the Windsor border because I thought we were taking someone to the airport. And we drove to the Windsor border, which borders Detroit. And I was handed a card at the Tim Hortons. I'm like, the fuck? It's not my birthday. And then it said in the card, we're going to Orlando. Yeah, fucking A. And we did a whole road trip and we did the whole Eastern Seaboard. And I remember getting like to cross the bridge and crossing the US. And then it sunk and it hit me at that point. It's like, it's been less than a year since 9/11. And we're going into the States, and it had a different feeling to it. I'm a very well-traveled American traveler. I've been to so many different parts of the US, and it's got a feeling to it. It always has a feeling to it, but this time it had like a very somber, very frightening, very uncertain feeling in the air. And I remember just driving through all the major cities and seeing all the different billboards on speaking to all the different law enforcement and firefighters that were lost. And we do want to make mention that there was over 2,977 fatalities and over 25,000 injuries. And one of the biggest things that took place was there was over 340 law enforcement 340 firefighters and 72 law enforcement officers that were lost that day. And they were just paying tribute to these people everywhere. Billboards, huge posters on the sides of buildings, you name it. They were treated like the heroes that they were, because they were. I mean, could you imagine seeing two fucking planes flying into buildings, and you're a fighter and you're looking at that shit. And of course, the fire is almost all the way at the top of this damn thing. And you're thinking, fuck, I got to go in there. I couldn't even imagine it. But sidetracked again, ADHD brain. As we were coming, so we went to Orlando, did the whole Orlando thing. Disney World was very, very locked down, very, very secure. And the people we were traveling with at the time suggested that we pick a destination, as three of us, that we each pick a destination to spend 24 hours at on our way home. One person picked Savannah, Georgia, which, because I'm a huge Forrest Gump fan, as I alluded to earlier, making mention of a clip. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, if not my favorite movie of all time. It's so hard to say. But the bench that everything was filmed on was in Savannah. So I had fun with that. We did that. I picked Washington, D.C., and the other person in our party picked New York City. And this is where everything ties in, because when we drove into Washington, a lot of that Pentagon was still missing. And if you see clips of them showing the Pentagon one, you can see that the interstate is right snug beside it. So I'm driving up, and all you see is this huge piece of the Pentagon missing. And it becomes real at that point. Everything you see on TV is TV. Like you see an actor on TV all the time, it's whatever. But when you meet that actor is now real, like real to you. Same thing with this. And it hit me huge at that point. Just seeing that, and then walking through Washington, a lot of things were closed. Like I didn't get to do the Washington Monument. They had Lincoln all tied off and whatnot, so we couldn't get too close to Lincoln. And just walking up to the White House, there was a black backpack, just sitting there in the middle of the road, right near the black fence. And all of a sudden, you see all these Secret Service and all of these people from CIA and FBI and you name it. They were all there, and they all swarmed in on this backpack thinking it was a bomb. And this poor dad comes running up and goes, sorry, drop my bag. And they put that motherfucker to the ground, and they put guns in his face until they deemed everything that was in there was just simply a mistake and they weren't being goaded into an attack. That's how much their backs were up against the wall at that point in time. And I remember that vividly. I remember that memory more than I remember what even actually seeing the White House. But Americans sensationalize so much of their politics and so much of Washington, D.C., and they make it to the point where you're seeing these things. It's so cool, but it was almost like it was taken away from me because of everything that was going on and the heightened edge everyone was on. But then we got to New York City, and boy, oh boy, that was it. I don't know if I'll ever experience that feeling again, and I don't ever want to. But you start walking along the street where it's happening, or where it happened, and on one side you have a huge fence and all these flags from all around the world signed off on, people sending their condolences cards, bears, candles, you name it, for stretching like blocks. And this is New York City blocks. So it's going blocks and blocks. And on the opposite side, you know, when you're going through, let's use Vancouver as an example. You know, when you're walking through Vancouver and they're building a new skyscraper or they're building a new tower and they have the construction kind of all the boards up so that you can't really see what's going on. And then there's little square cutouts where you can see every so often what's going on inside. That's what it was there. They had this big, huge section all sectioned off and all boarded up, but there was holes where you could see inside. And I want to say it was about, well, it wasn't even a year. They were still peeling bodies out. They were still peeling bodies out. The destruction, the chaos, the damage and everything that was still existing, because they didn't fully clean it up till May 2000 sometime in 2002 or 2003 is when it finally ended all the cleanup. And man, unreal, like unreal. And ever since then, I've just been enthralled with 9/11. I take every documentary in, and they're so hard to watch, especially like you said, the people jumping from windows. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine going to work and then in 2 hours later, a plane just flew into your building, and now you have to decide you're either going to die by fire or die by falling over 150 stories to your death? So fucked up. So fucked. But anyway, that's my story of my time in the US after all that happened, and just seeing everything. And like there was a lot of security, and even just doing a lot of the New Yorky type things, like going to the Statue of Liberty of stuff, was very, very difficult. Really long lines, tons and tons of heightened security.
That's cool you were able to go there, but like, yeah, no kidding. Like, that must have been a completely different way of seeing it than you expected, for sure.
It's not like anything you would ever think of. It's just you see something like that on TV, and then you don't think you're ever gonna see something like that, the devastation of it up close. And to be able to do that was interesting in a way, because it was a part of world history, and it's something that we're not going to be the only people that are going to be talking about this on this particular day. There's going to be lots of people that are going to be talking about this, and will continue to do for 50, 100 years, well beyond when we're dead. Because it was the difference between this was that with Pearl Harbor and stuff, that was World War II. That was war. That was actual war. War was declared, war was taking place. And while no one's seen it coming, and not to minimize or discredit the devastation or the effects on us as society today, 9/11 was a different monster. There was no war. There was a quote unquote war on terrorism to come that's always kind of been there, but there was no war. Everybody was just going about their fucking business on September 11th, and then bam. So it hits differently than things like Pearl Harbor and such, because it wasn't war. It was a declaration of war towards the Americans, and in some shape or form, because we're allies, us as well.
Yeah, and it like you said, it'll be there forever. Like, it'll be in schools and everything. It's just like all the major events that have happened that everyone learns about. And the second it happened, it's like everyone knew, like, this is world changing. And like I said, the world went frozen, and the world don't stop for nothing, but it stopped for that for a while, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it definitely did. Now let me ask you, because like you alluded to, the world doesn't stop for nothing. How do you think it would be if 9/11 happened today, especially in the social digital world that we live in now?
There might be more accountability, I guess. I'm not too sure how to say, but like you said, you know, situations where you're like running to see if other people know. Everyone would have known the second it happened. Lack of footage, right? Because there isn't a whole lot of footage of it actually happening, right? I guess they were able to scrounge up some, but in the comparison to today, where there's technology everywhere, even just cameras in the streets, you know, watching everybody when they fucking drive, like the whole nine, there'd be a lot more video of it. But I do think it would hit us all the same as like a world event. But the war afterwards, I think, would be a lot more. It would be a lot more. What's the word for it? It'd be escalated a whole lot more. That's what I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think it would have escalated a whole lot more too. I think that if something of that nature was to happen today, I think it would cause a huge global meltdown, because of those events that took place on 9/11 in 2001. The whole world went in, and the economy just went into a total shit. It took a total nosedive, and we were all in recessions, and it was a very difficult time financially and whatnot. Could you imagine if that happened now, though? Especially with, it's so easy to spread fear, paranoia, and propaganda nowadays. So easy. So could you just imagine if that was to take place today? Everybody would be freaking the fuck out on a totally different level, to the point where I think it would escalate the situation a million times worse and have ramifications that would be so much longer lasting than what we're even dealing with now.
Yeah, and with COVID going on right now, like
Oh,
I didn't even think of the whole COVID thing, but
neither did I.
because you gotta believe, like, with technology we've become a little more secure, and say if how secure we're all supposed to be today, if someone was able to hijack a plane and have that happen, what the hell else could they do, right? Especially with today, you
Well, that's
know.
how we were even thinking then as well, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
today, whew. Yeah, I honestly couldn't imagine what it would have been today, and it should have never happened then. And we can get into a little bit about that. What are your thoughts about 9/11 in regards to, do you think it went down exactly like they said it went down, or do you feel that there was something more sinister going on in the background?
I don't believe that the whole story is 100% true. Um, was there some government involvement? There's possibly, some people think that the Pentagon, there was information in that area, that's why it was struck, and the towers were hit in a way to kind of cover that up. But everyone's got a conspiracy twist to it. But there is stuff out there that makes you think, and just like there's stuff out there that makes us think about COVID. Like, oh, is there, well, the government's saying this, but I heard this on the news. Like how there's this one that I always go back to in New York, that they heard more than three explosions or something like that. And then the Pentagon, no one talks about it. The people that saved the plane, if they even saved the plane, who knows, right? Because they're all like gone. We don't hear a lot about that. That was one that always put me for a twist. It was like, hey, the towers and the Pentagon got hit, and then these other people, that were heroes that made the plane, crash land somewhere else. But you don't hear about the Pentagon. All the focus is on 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Like, you're not even allowed to be like kind of sad and upset about the Pentagon happening. It's like they're acting like it doesn't matter. To me, it's just as a big a fucking deal. You know what I mean? Like, so it's definitely left a culture slash opening for people to think that there's a conspiracy as well, even if it is 100% true what they're telling us, because they're not talking about everything. And if you look at Fahrenheit 9/11 with Michael Moore, as much as I hate saying it because I'm not a huge fan of the guy, there's even points in there that tie it to government. And then Russia, they built a monument for 9/11 if you Google it, and there it was mentioned that they didn't care about it at one point, and it's like they literally have a monument. They did give a shit about it. So there's all these just different things that end up happening to get twisted in the media, slash, just like COVID, how can you ignore some of these things? And I remember, when people were thinking that maybe the government was involved in the attacks, I was working at Winners, and it was years later, and everyone's still 100%. They're like, these random people, they went and got planes and they took them. There's no way the government was involved whatsoever. And me, I'm going, well, it's possible, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to fucking get fired from my job. You know what I mean? I could be wrong, totally could. But I mean, again, just like COVID, there's little fucking things out there that make you wonder and question. And when you question them, you kind of don't get your answers.
No, you never do get your answers. That's for damn sure. You never get your answers. And it's, I'm with you. I don't trust the government. I just don't. Do I think everything they say is a lie? No. Do I think everything they say is the truth? Absolutely not. And it's really frightening to me. And we're going to get into that in next week's episode for the COVID and whatnot, and the vaccines and all that stuff. There's just no trust in government. There shouldn't be. And I don't understand why people do. I don't understand why people blindly trust the fucking government, as if there are saviors that do no wrong and always tell us the truth and never misguide us or never mislead us. When it comes to 9/11, there's a lot of questions. A lot of questions. And there's questions that have been asked for years. And just like with COVID, we're never going to know the answers. We're never going to know what actually happened that day, because the Bushes have been in business with the bin Ladens for years before all this started happening. I mean, this all traces back to when Russia invaded Afghanistan in the 80s. And, Americans helped the Afghani people at that point, and they helped all the rebels, and they helped by giving them all these weapons and all stuff. Well, they turned out to be the fucking Taliban, which is the government that took control of that country for years and years, and could have been even in control at that point. And my history is not exactly 100, so I am paraphrasing history here, and I apologize for that. But it started then. And even with the association with the bin Ladens and stuff like that, it all started then. There's so much to it that you wonder, and it goes even to the infrastructures. Well, the buildings flew in at the top, and the way the infrastructure dropped suggests that there was nothing but bombs under the basement, and that the bombs all went off, and that's what brought down the towers. To, like you alluded to, the sounds of another explosion. So many different things we'll never know the answers to. And my answer is just going to be, we're never going to know the answers. I have questions. I look at things and go, that doesn't add up. But with all due respect to all the lives that were lost that day and whatnot, I don't further my thoughts on a conspiracy level, because there's just no point. What happened was what happened. A lot of people tragically died that day, and I just don't want to think too hard that the American people's government were responsible for all those lives. 3,000 lives, almost 3,000 lives, and over 25,000 injuries. And that's not including all the people that got sick with cancer and shit like that being near 9/11, because people think about the towers coming down. Once they came down, all that smoke and all that dust and all that debris and shit that came flying and blanketed a whole entire part of Manhattan, people breathed that shit in. And that was very, very, very rough for a lot of people, because a lot of people that were very close to that got very, very sick. And it's just, so I try not to think too much about government involvement in that, because, man, could you imagine if it came out somehow, some way, you had an Edward Snowden type whistleblower that just spilled the whole tea and like, yep, we're the ones that set it up so that we could attack. Whew.
Yeah, and I feel like if we ever got that information, it would be so many years down the line, no one would be held accountable.
That's a fair fact too, because look at, like, we as a Western society like to employ the oldest fucking people possible to go into office. So if that were to ever happen, yeah, the Bushes would be long dead, and I'm sure their parents or their kids would be too. So yeah, no one would be held accountable for that sort of thing. Colin Powell, all those guys, they're all, yeah, fair point.
On that note of the way the buildings fell, you're right. Like when it happened, lots of people were like, that's not, everyone expected it to topple. Anyone you talk to, they thought it was going to topple, or the top half was going to fall off. Like there's all the, and that's just the common person, not anyone scientific, no scientists at all. But like you said, I don't want to dwell on that.
No, especially like one of the details is that it's unfortunate is when people were fleeing, all the gas from the plane was going down the elevator shaft and was landing on people. Fuel, hot fucking plane jet fuel. Man, I just imagine myself being there that day and feeling what the horror, like true horror, is like. That is true horror. And I can't imagine it. I can't pinpoint a way that I would feel, because it's true horror. It's something that I hope nobody ever has to experience ever again. And could you imagine being a survivor of that?
That's something you'd definitely be holding on to for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And I mean, and look, and let's fast forward to today. They fought in Afghanistan for over 20 years. and they got rid of the Taliban and they upseated the Taliban, and then here we are today, and President Biden has unraveled 20 years of everything that they fought there for by egregiously pulling everybody, all the military people out so quickly, leaving behind so much equipment. And guess who's back in power? The Taliban. So what was it all for? What was it all for? And that's the sad part, is I can't answer that. I don't know.
Yeah, time will tell, hopefully.
Yeah, time has not been our friend as of late to be telling things, but it'll be very interesting to see. But regardless, it's a very somber day. It's a day of reflection. It's a day of not being able to put into the words the type of catastrophic event that took place. And we hope that for the past 45 minutes, we've been able to do justice to what took place and have a good conversation about, again, a horrific event in our people's time. And where were you on that day of 9/11? Leave us a comment and let us know your stories and how it affected you. And this isn't for promotion on the show, and this isn't to grow the show. This is just conversation amongst human beings. We would just like to know, like, where were you, and how did it make you feel? But I think that's about all we really need to discuss about today. It's not anything that we need to dive in deeper on. What do you say, Mike? Do you have anything else that you want to discuss about 9/11 today?
I think that's about it. And everybody, I believe it's at 9/11 Pacific time, but they do a moment of silence. And I look at a moment of silence, you miss it, well, do it in that day. You know what I mean? So take a moment of silence and reflect. I know I'm going to be doing that.
For sure. I do it every 9/11. I watch, whatever documentary I can get my hands on. And right now, Netflix has a great documentary series that has been released. It's called Turning Points, 9/11 and the War on Terror. So if you're not too familiar with what happened during 9/11 and you're interested to find out, have a look, have a watch, and just be very grateful that you're at where you're at now, especially during COVID and everything that's going on with COVID. It's a crazy time in our lives right now. Just think of all those people that had to go through all that horror that day. And I guarantee you that any one of those people would trade their situations with us that are going through COVID right now any day of the week. Because these people were without their, could you imagine a family member working there and you spend months and years trying to find them or trying to track their remains to the point where their remains never show up? Could you imagine that?
It just leaves you speechless even thinking about it. Like the families affected and the people affected. Like, yeah, I just couldn't imagine.
Generational trauma is going to come into a lot of those families' lives, and generations well beyond are going to feel the effects of it. And it's just so unfortunate. But we here at the Canadian Talkin Shop podcast, we think about what took place in 9/11. We extend our condolences to all the families and friends that lost someone or that went through horrific injuries or still feel the effects of what happened on 9/11 today. Our thoughts are definitely with you. And that concludes our 20 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years, but that concludes our 20-year anniversary special on 9/11. Tune in next week on our normal regular Friday time slot for our COVID and vaccine episode. Until next week, I'm your Canadian Talkin Shop, Stu Francis.
I'm Mike Barakoff signing off.